Hi, my name is Bhumika, and in this chapter, we're going to study about the physiology of respiration. We have already done about the structure of lungs and the intercostal muscles, which kind of acts as a background data for this. And in this chapter, we're going to concentrate about the gaseous exchange, basically. So starting out, I'm going to read out the breathing process, although I have already explained it in the previous lesson. The external intercostals plus the diaphragm, it contracts to bring about inspiration. Contraction of external intercostal muscles brings about elevation of the ribs and sternum, and it increases front to back dimension of the thoracic cavity. It also lowers air pressure in the lungs, and the air it starts moving into the lungs. Contraction of the diaphragm moves downwards, increases the vertical dimension of the thoracic cavity, lowers the air pressure in the lungs, and as such air moves into the lungs. So because the air it always moves down the pressure gradient, that is the reason why it starts moving from high pressure to lower pressure. Now this was about inhalation. How does exhalation happen? Relaxation of external intercostal muscles and diaphragm takes place. Return of the diaphragm, ribs and sternum to resting position restores the thoracic cavity to pre-inspiratory volume, and it increases the pressure in the lungs, and as such the air inside the lungs, it moves from high pressure to lower pressure, from inside to outside, and as such the air is exhaled. Let's talk about external respiration now. Exchange of O2 and CO2 between external environment and the cells of the body is termed as external respiration. And it is efficient because of the alveoli and capillaries. They have very thin walls and they are about abundant. Internal respiration is the intracellular use of oxygen to make adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency of the cell. It occurs by simple diffusion along the partial pressure gradients. Now we need to know what is partial pressure. Is the individual pressure which is exerted independently by a particular gas within a mixture of gases. The air we breathe in is a mixture of gases, primarily nitrogen, oxygen and carbon dioxide. So that the air you blow into a balloon, it creates pressure that causes the balloon to expand, and this pressure is generated as all the molecules of the nitrogen, oxygen and CO2, they move about and collide with the walls of the balloon, and that is how the balloon gets inflated. That's general chemistry. However, the total pressure generated by the air is due to part to nitrogen, in part to oxygen and in part to carbon dioxide. That part of the total pressure generated by oxygen is the partial pressure of oxygen, while that generated by CO2 is the partial pressure of CO2. A gas's partial pressure therefore is a measure of how much that gas is present. The partial pressure exerted by each gas in a mixture equals the total pressure times the fractional composition of the gas in the mixture. So given that the total atmospheric pressure at sea level is about 760 millimeter of mercury, and the air contains 21% of oxygen, so what will be the partial pressure? 21 by 100 into 760, which comes out to be 160 mm of mercury. So in the alveoli, PO2, that means partial pressure of oxygen, is 100 mm of Hg, and PCO2 is 40 millimeter of Hg. Alveolar capillaries. Entering the alveolar capillaries, PO2 becomes 40 mm of Hg and PCO2 becomes 45 mm of Hg. Now 40 mm of Hg of oxygen. Why is that so? Because the blood has just returned from the systemic circulation, and all the oxygen, it has been taken away by the tissues, and it is 45 mm of Hg in case of carbon dioxide, because the blood returning from the systemic circulation has picked up carbon dioxide which was made up by the tissues. While in the alveolar capillaries, the diffusion of the gases it occurs, oxygen diffuses from the alveoli into the blood and carbon dioxide from the blood into the alveoli. Leaving the alveolar capillaries, again PO2 becomes 100 and PCO2 becomes 40. Now blood which leaves the alveolar capillaries, it returns to the left atrium and is pumped by the left ventricles into the systemic circulation. We have done this in the chapter of the heart. This blood travels through arteries and arterioles into the system or body capillaries. As blood travels to the arteries and arterioles, no gas exchange takes place. That's common knowledge. Now entering the systemic capillaries, PO2 is 100 mm, PCO2 is 40 mm. In resting condition, PO2 is 40 mm, again because oxygen has been used up, and CO2 is 45 mm because carbon dioxide has been picked up. Because of the difference in the partial pressure of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the systemic capillaries in the body cells, oxygen it diffuses from the blood and into the cell, while carbon dioxide diffuses from the cells into the blood. So that is how it happens. Leaving the systemic capillaries, PO2 is 40 mm of Hg and PCO2 is 45 mm of Hg. Blood leaving the systemic capillaries returns to the heart in the right atrium via the venules and the veins, and no gas exchange takes place. This blood is then pumped to the lungs by the right ventricle. Now, how are oxygen and carbon dioxide transported in the blood? Oxygen is carried in the blood in 98.5% bound to hemoglobin and only 1.5% which is present in the plasma. Because almost all oxygen in the blood is transported by hemoglobin, the relationship between the concentration of oxygen and hemoglobin saturation is an important one. So, as you can see, it is a sigmoid curve, as you can observe here. And this curve it kind of shifts in the left and the right direction because of certain factors. We're going to study about the certain factors in much more detail. The hemoglobin saturation is the extent to which the hemoglobin in the blood is combined with oxygen, and it depends upon the partial pressure of oxygen in the blood. The factors that affect oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve are lower pH, increased temperature, more 2,3-diphosphoglycerate or DPG, and increased levels of carbon dioxide. These factors they change when tissues become more active. For example, when a skeletal muscle starts contracting, the cells in that muscle they make more oxygen. They use more oxygen, and when they use more oxygen, that means they make more ATP, and as such they produce more waste product, and that waste product is what? CO2. Now, as CO2 is produced, the heat is also produced, so the temperature in the active tissues it increases. More CO2 translates into a lower pH. That is so because the reaction occurs like this: CO2 plus H2, it will form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is again unstable, so it forms bicarbonate ions and H plus. Now, more H plus, that means lower pH. So, more hydrogen ions, a lower, more acidic pH takes place. So, in active tissues, there are high levels of carbon dioxide, a lower pH, and high temperature. In addition, at lower PO2 levels, red blood cells, the erythrocytes, they start producing a substance which is known as the 2,3-diphosphoglycerate. These changing conditions in active tissues cause an alteration in the structure of hemoglobin, and as such, this structure of hemoglobin, it gives up oxygen. In other words, in active tissues, more hemoglobin molecules, it gives up its oxygen, and in place of oxygen some carbon dioxide molecules may get attached. We're going to study about that later. Now let's study about how carbon dioxide is transported from the body cells. So 60% of it travels in the form of bicarbonate ions. It is formed when CO2, which is released by cells making ATP, it combines with water due to the enzyme in the RBC called carbonic anhydrase, and it forms carbonic acid, and then again we knew it dissociates into bicarbonate ions as well as hydronium ions. Then 30% is transported in the form of carbaminohemoglobin. We studied about this alteration in structure of hemoglobin, which causes the hemoglobin to give up its oxygen. Now, in place of this oxygen, the carbon dioxide it combines with hemoglobin, and as such, it gives rise to carbaminohemoglobin, and almost 10% is dissolved in plasma. Now, there's this very important topic that you need to know: the chloride shift. When CO2 enters the blood from the tissues, it passes into the RBCs and is converted by bicarbonate dehydratase to bicarbonate ions. We already did this. Now, these bicarbonate ions from the RBCs, they tend to come out into the plasma. Now, to counterbalance this effect, the Cl minus ions from the plasma, they enter the RBC, and this is termed as chloride shift. Just to maintain the charge of both RBCs and plasma, all of this happens, and HCO3 minus it comes out, Cl minus it goes in, and this is what chloride shift is. So that was about physiology of respiration. I hope I made myself clear. I hope all these chapters are helpful to you in revising them quickly. If you like this chapter, then you may follow me, rate me, review me, and recommend this lesson wherever relevant. Thank you for watching.